Have you ever noticed that people throughout history who seem to have genuinely figured something out, Jesus, Buddha, Krishnamurti, Lao Tzu, none of them gave you a formula. They pointed. And I used to think that was a limitation, that they just couldn't quite articulate it. Now I think pointing was the only honest option. Because what they were pointing at is beyond language. Not because it's too complex, but because language itself is the thing that hides it. Most people have touched being without knowing it. You're in flow, you're in nature, you're in a moment so full that the voice in your head goes quiet. The self, the constant narrator, the one managing and comparing and planning, temporarily disappears. And what's left is just presence, awareness, something that simply is. That's being. And it's real and it's available to anyone. But here's what I realized recently. There's another level, and the difference between them isn't degree, it's structure. The being most of us experience is still inside the causal chain. Something happens, the environment gets quiet, the conditions align, you hit flow, and being arises. It was caused. The right circumstances produced the state, which means it's dependent. It comes and goes. It requires conditions to cooperate. Uncaused being is different. It doesn't arise because something happened. It doesn't need the environment to cooperate. It isn't triggered by flow or meditation or the right moment. It just is. Independent of conditions, independent of circumstance, independent of cause entirely. That's what Jesus points at, what Buddha points at, what every genuine tradition is gesturing toward when it talks about enlightenment. Not a better version of caused being, a state that has stepped outside the causal chain completely. Here's where it gets precise. Causality. Cause preceding effect is a property of space-time. It's built into this framework of time itself. This happened, then that happened because of this. Uncaused being is, by definition, prior to causality, which means prior to time, which means prior to space-time entirely. This is not poetry, it's a structural claim. Uncaused being operates outside the framework that all of physics is built on. And remember what quantum mechanics keeps bumping into? Phenomena that don't fit cleanly inside the causal, space-time framework. The observer affecting the observed, entanglement across any distance, particles existing in multiple states until measured. Physics keeps finding edges, places where the framework strains. What if those edges are the same edge? What if quantum is space-time based physics running into the territory of uncaused being and not having the language to say so? So why didn't Jesus just write a textbook? Well, I mean, he kind of did, but why didn't Buddha give you the 10 steps? Because the moment you put it in language, you've divided it. Language is causal. Words point at things by separating them from other things. Subject, object, this, that, before, after. Uncaused being has none of those divisions. It's the ground before the divisions arise. So any sentence you write about it is already wrong. Not because the sentence is imprecise, but because the act of writing a sentence requires the very structure that uncaused being precedes. You can't use division to describe what exists before division. So you point. You build a life so coherent with a thing that people feel it in your presence. Jesus, Buddha, Krishnamurti. You speak in paradoxes that break the listener's conceptual machinery just long enough for something to be recognized. You don't explain, you create the conditions for recognition, and then you step back. Let me make this concrete. There are three places a person can live from. The first is unconscious reaction, fully inside conditioning, cause and effect running automatically. This happened, so I feel this, so I do this. No gap, no presence, just the machinery of the self operating on autopilot. The second is being. The self quiets, presence arises. You're here, actually here, not managed by the past or pulled by the future. This is available to most people, if not all people. Meditation can point at it, flow produces it, great relationships touch it, but it's still conditional. It still requires something to cause it. The third is uncaused being. The self doesn't quiet because the conditions were right. The self has dissolved as the operating system entirely. What remains isn't a person who sometimes experiences presence, it's presence itself, living through a person, permanent, unconditional, outside the causal chain. That's enlightenment, not a mood, not an achievement, a fundamental restructuring of what's running the show. Here's the paradox that every tradition eventually arises at. You cannot effort your way to uncaused being because effort is a cause. The moment you're trying to get there, meditating harder, practicing more, pushing toward it, you're inside the causal chain. You're doing cause and effect in the direction of something you want to produce. But uncaused being isn't produced. It's what remains when the producer dissolves. This is why Krishnamurti wouldn't give you a method. Why Zen masters answer questions with nonsense. Why the gospel is full of paradox. They're not being difficult, they're being precise. Any method you give someone is a cause, and you cannot cause your way to uncaused being. You can only see with total clarity what's in the way. And then stop doing it. The greatest figures in human history didn't leave you a formula because they couldn't. Let me say that again. I said that incorrectly. The greatest figures in human history didn't leave you a formula because they couldn't. Not because they weren't smart enough, not because they were being mysterious, because the thing they were pointing at exists prior to the structure, because the thing they were pointing at exists prior to the structure that formulas require, prior to cause and effect, prior to language, prior to space, time. And the most honest thing you can do with something like that is point. Build your life in the direction of it. Speak as close to the edge of language as you can get, and then go quiet. Because silence isn't a failure to explain, it's the only response that doesn't lie.